Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 13 of Montana's 69th legislative session. My name is Gaby Crevitt. I'm the communications director with the Montana Democratic Party.
And I'm Shannon O'Brien, former lawmaker, statewide candidate, and retired teacher.
Shannon, last week we spent the majority of the episode discussing the fate of Ravalli County Senator and former Senate President Jason Ellsworth. So last Friday, at this point, it wasn't clear what the future held for him. Now we have some updates from the Senate floor. But before we get into things today, I want to let folks know that we have a very special guest on the podcast this week. Former Montana Supreme Court Justice Mike Wheat joins us today to discuss the unprecedented attacks on Montana's judiciary system. Shannon, this was a great conversation about one of the most pressing issues facing lawmakers this session. I think you're going to find it very informative.
Sounds great, Gabby. I'm looking forward to it. And we did learn this week the deeply unpopular partisan judge bill, SB 42, which would have essentially made judicial candidates run with a political affiliation on the ballot. And that failed on the House floor. For those of you keeping score at home, that's 22 of the 27 sham judicial reform bills introduced by Republicans that have failed to make it out of the legislature. So far, only one has been signed by the governor, but there's still lots of work ahead in the fight to protect Montana's sacred judiciary. And so there's no celebrating yet.
Indeed. So, Shannon, where did we leave off last week with Senator Ellsworth, and what updates do you have for us now?
So to back up just a little bit, the Ellsworth debacle, if you will, we had Senator Ellsworth, former president of the Senate, who signed a couple of contracts, taxpayer money, went before ethics. He's also facing criminal charges separately, but went before ethics committee in the Senate to really explore what went wrong and what he did. And there were numerous findings. The most egregious was that he entered into a contract without disclosing that this was a friend of his. So we left off last week, and the Senate was not coming to agreement on a consequence for him. The right-wing Republicans wanted to kick him out completely of the Senate and strip him of that, of being a senator. The Democrats wanted some significant consequences. Now, this week, we have a major update, and we can put this issue to rest, finally, on the Senate side anyway. Ellsworth is banned from the Senate floor for life, and he is censured, meaning he can no longer participate in any committees, including interim committees. Basically, the only thing he can do is vote on Senate floor bills, but he has to vote remotely. So pretty tough consequences.
So, Shannon, how are legislators generally feeling about this punishment? Is this fair to say that this was a compromise?
My understanding is that all senators agreed that there needed to be some consequences for this behavior. And the discretion was to what extent. And the far right wanted him expelled immediately and no longer able to be a senator. There were others who thought much more mild consequences should be presented. So this, I think, is a compromise that to be banned from the Senate floor for life. I mean, that means that his grandkids can't go with him to tour the Capitol building, and he can't point out his old seat or take them up onto the rostrum to show what happens. That's pretty severe. Yeah, so I'm sure it was tough for a lot of folks in the Senate to come to that conclusion.
Well, moving on, of course, there's lots of other news coming out of the legislature this week. What other updates do you have for us, Shannon?
So lots is happening. Things are starting to speed up right now as we're past the 2/3 marker and approaching the 1/4 left of the legislative calendar. And things will continue to speed up. But one really exciting thing that happened yesterday, I popped on to watch a committee hearing only to see that the Senate floor was still in session after hours. Lo and behold, there were at least 10 blast motions that took place at the end of the Senate floor session yesterday. So let me remind you, and we saw this happen President's Day, actually. There are bills that were either tabled or stuck in committee. And the Democrats, along with this bipartisan group of moderate Republicans as well, were able to pull bills that were stuck in committee or tabled in committee, pulled them onto the Senate floor. And this happened bill after bill after bill after bill. And these are good bills that are really promoting fair taxes. There were a number of fair tax bills that got stuck in Senate tax that were pulled out that were great to see. And then a number of other bills that were just good for Montanans that got stuck in committee and now will be voted on by the whole Senate. And it's great news. Great news for Montanans.
Awesome. Well, last week, in the last episode, you brought up the budget and the great work Democrats are doing to address things like education, healthcare, and affordable housing. Do you have any updates from the budget?
Yeah, such an exciting time right now in the budget. You know, our budget equals our values. And you've heard that before, and you'll hear it again, that you put your money where your mouth is. And House Bill 2 is being heard this week in the House. And that is a document. We all get binders about that thick that have each section of the bill. And I think the House bills, like 1 through maybe 15, are allocated for the significant budget items. But House Bill 2, that's the meat and potatoes of state government. So that's moving through. There will be amendments, I'm sure. And then once it goes through the House, it'll have to go through the Senate. So this is a really critical and intense time for legislators to be aware of how committees are proposing to spend money, our taxpayer dollars. One really exciting thing, and there was a hearing yesterday on it in the Senate, endowments are being set up because we have this phenomenal surplus. Endowments are being set up for solutions to the problems of Montanans. And one that I'm keenly interested in is the chronic problem with childcare. And we have 50% of families that want childcare in Montana cannot find childcare. It just doesn't exist. And for those that can find it, it's unaffordable. We're talking about over $1,000 per child per month for childcare. So this bill is looking at setting up a trust or an endowment for $100 million, maybe $150 million. Looks like Lou Jones is introducing the what we call a companion bill that has the money set aside for it to set up really a bigger picture, holistic approach to how do we solve this problem so that Montana workers, families can get back to work and help the economy. I have also heard about an endowment to be set up for housing and chronic, serious issue in Montana right now, very critical. And these are the problems, I believe, that Montana citizens have voted and hired legislators to solve. And so it's so exciting to see that those are the issues that are being addressed. And much of the far right Republican agenda is not being addressed. And that's, for example, big tax cuts for the wealthiest Montanans and other bills taking away a woman's right to make decisions over her own body, healthcare privacy, and other issues.
So, Shannon, we are approaching the end of the session. Do you have any thoughts about that as we get, within a month of the end of the session?
Yeah, just keep an eye out. So things are, as I mentioned earlier, we're between 2/3 and 3/4 of the way through the session. I think technically Monday, May 5th is day 90. There might be some wiggle. We can go over. As long as we have passed the budget, the primary budget, the legislature can sine die. I think there's a 3-day wiggle room where they can sine die a couple of days before that 90-day mark. But so many things can happen so fast with bills that are prioritized by leadership. And this is a time where our legislators are serving so with their heart and soul and mind, and they're spending long days on the House and Senate floors and in committee to get these bills through and to make sure that they are right, because they know that these are laws and these are taxpayer dollars, and so they're not taken lightly.
Well, Shannon, I'm really excited to share with you and our listeners my interview with Justice Wheat. I think you guys will really enjoy it. Well, we're really excited today to have Justice Mike Wheat on the Blue Bench podcast. Thank you again for joining us.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Well, let's start with some national news. From my understanding, this week we had a big Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. What are some of your takeaways from that race?
Well, I think that it's a really interesting predictor of what could happen in the future. And a little background. First of all, the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin is a statewide race. So it's not running for a district for the legislature or the House of Representatives or anything like that. And so what happened in Wisconsin, there's two things that I think are important. One is around $100 million was spent on that race, which is just incredible, which gives you some insight into the kind of money that flows into these races. And it's not from little folks like you and I, going to a fundraiser and giving a couple $100. It's from big-time PACs that want to influence these Supreme Court races, or people like Elon Musk. My understanding is he spent somewhere between $20 and $25 million of his own money on that race. The important thing is that the winner of that race, the Liberal candidate, and all of the papers are calling, she won by 10%, which is huge. And just reading an article about another Supreme Court justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, who is a conservative, and she was lambasting I forget her name's Croft, the woman who just won, was lambasting Crawford, saying that all the money she brought in to buy this race so bad, she wasn't really looking forward to working with it. It shows you how antagonistic these races can be. But every district in the state of Wisconsin that voted in this voted blue. Every one. And Donald Trump won Wisconsin, not by much, but he still won. So it was, for all intents and purposes, in the presidential race, a red state. And so this is a huge win. And it adds a couple of messages about Elon Musk races, the amount of money that can flow into these so other people can buy races, and how at least the voters in Wisconsin responded to that. So I think it's a really important message, and it should be empowering to people who are thinking about these future races. The next race here in Montana for our congressional seats, that if we work hard and the message out is the right message, we can win.
Yeah,
Great.
I agree. I think it is an interesting snapshot of the political moment we're in, and of course that's Wisconsin, and we're here in Montana, where we're seeing some pretty wild attempts from the Montana GOP attacking Montana's judiciary system. So I want to start just kind of backing up. Of course, we know there's been something like 23 bills that have already been introduced in the legislature attacking the judiciary. How did we get here? What circumstances have led Republicans to this point where they're just proposing bill after bill that's attacking the courts?
Well, it didn't just start this session. It's been going on for a number of years, and the legislature has been attacking court for several sessions of the legislature. In fact, they're just out and out attack. And so it's a war between the legislature and the court. And of course, the court is a third branch government, and they are the ones that are empowered with deciding constitutional issues that come up when legislation is passed. And they've been overturning a lot of the bills that the Republicans have passed, and they don't like that. And they want to have a court that is more sympathetic and more in line with their, what I call, extreme view of things. And so it's there to undermine the court's integrity, turn public opinion against the court, because historically courts have been held in pretty high esteem. But they want to undermine that, so they go after the integrity of the court. They accuse the court of being too liberal, of legislating from the bench. And so with those kinds of attacks, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to, first of all, undermine the court. Secondly, they're trying to persuade a voter that they should pay attention to these court races because this court is out of control. And that's sort of what got us here. But I think what really started this whole thing off was when after the last legislature and the court had overturned some of the legislature's bills as unconstitutional. They want to look out that they were going to be coming through, and so they formed this special committee, interim committee to what was it, to scrutinize the court and reform the court,
Right.
sort of.
Right.
I guess it was judicial oversight and reform. And they came up with this raft of bills and handed over to the Republicans. The ones you were talking about got introduced. And so that's what they're doing. They're going after the court. They want to own the court. They don't want a court that's going to hold their feet to the fire and take away laws that they think are constitutional when they're not. And so that's it.
That was going to be my next question, is what do Republicans stand to gain from this? And you just answered it. It sounds like they are hoping that a partisan court would just help rubber stamp some of their unconstitutional bills and get them through. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. It's they want a court that is more rubber stamp than a roadblock. It's because if the court does its job right, it will review the legislation they passed in light of the Constitution, and they will review it in light of past case law cases that have been decided by previous courts and make a decision as to its constitutionality. They don't want that. In fact, I think some of these bills that aren't in the light of day had to do with not allowing the Supreme Court to even decide constitutionality, that by legislature and nonsense like that. They just want to overpower the court on.
Well, that's one strategy, I guess. I want to ask you a little bit about the arguments from the other side that I've been hearing, and it centers around transparency. So there are folks that say, why not introduce the partisanship into our judicial races? It will just provide more transparency, suggesting that either folks have some sort of, inherent bias, or they are in fact registered Ds or registered Rs. What do you say to folks that kind of share that argument with you?
Well, it depends on finding what's transparent and not. From the Republicans' point of view, transparency for them is by the candidate the way they want. I think it's a smokescreen. I think that people want their Supreme Court and district court candidates to be people who are well qualified and have the proper skills to be on the bench, and that they want to be able to vote for somebody on that base, not on the basis of party affiliation. So this whole concept of transparency, and as for bringing partisanship into judicial races, is just a smokescreen at best. The other thing that I think, at least during my term on the court and during the times I was campaigning for the court, at least going out and being able to talk to people, let them look you in the face and decide what they feel about you, and let them look at your record, and you can tell them about it. They can ask you questions so that they can make decisions about your qualifications, not based on your party affiliation. The other thing is that I was going to mention is that people who have to go into court for whatever reason, they like to know that they go into a courtroom, they're going into a courtroom that is a level playing field. They don't want to feel like they're going in with one hand tied back, because it's I can't think of examples right off the bat, but that's what builds confidence with the public, is knowing that the people who are in there, irrespective of their political leanings, they're going to follow the Constitution, are going to follow oaths that they take to fairly interpret the law and the Constitution, and to treat them fairly. That's what judicial system foundation is all about, is fairness and a level playing field.
I think you're right. And if you just think about the way folks mistrust politicians, that doesn't seem to be the case for judges. But once you start having politicians at the bench, like, I just can't imagine walking in and feeling like I have full confidence in the system when, these are politicians you're dealing with. It feels more like politicians than judges. So I could see how public confidence may also be eroded by something like this as well. People might think, cards are stacked against them the second they walk in. And that seems to just create a really problematic environment within our judicial system.
I was in the Senate for 2 sessions, and I was as a Democrat. And Jim Rice, who's on the Supreme Court, was in the legislature. He was in the House. I was in the Senate. I forget how many sessions he was in, but he was a Republican. And before either of us got there, there was a chief named Turnage, who was actually the president of the Montana Senate. He was a Republican. So there's been a transition from people who've run for public office in the legislative part where you are partisan, you do have opinions, you do take stand one or the other. Transition to the judiciary where you have to set that partisanship aside and judge cases on facts and the law and make decisions that way. So it's not a difficult transition, but it makes it harder when people are attacking the overall integrity of the court and trying to undermine it, like I think that you. Yeah.
Great. So moving on, I want to ask you, are there any bills in particular that you find to be extremely dangerous that have been introduced this session? Of course, related to the judiciary. If so, which bills are these and what will they do?
Well, I think all of the bills that were sent over to the legislature by this interim committee are dangerous bills because they're so one-sided and so political. But there's several of those that are still alive in the legislature that I think are important. One of them has already been tabled. It's not tabled. I think it lost on second reading in the House, and that was Senate Bill 42, which required partisanship and party affiliation at all levels of judicial races. When that lost, there's another House bill. Let me look it up for you. I don't remember.
Is it like 389 or?
No, it's House Bill 838.
838.
Yeah, and then on the Senate side, they have another bill, the Senate Bill 543.
Okay.
So both of those bills are basically identical, but it's watered down from imposing partisanship on all judicial races, but they are imposing partisanship on just the Supreme Court races. So if it passed, with one of those passed and it's signed by the governor, and if it passed constitutional muster, it would require anyone running for Supreme Court to announce whether a part appropriation. And the reason I think they're trying with the watered down version, because they'll have to be able to go back to the people who voted against House Senate Bill 42 and say, well, okay, we stripped down the bill, we got the partisanship in all the lower courts, but we think it's important on the Supreme Court because they're the final deciders, and so we think we should have, at least at that level, partisanship, party affiliation recognized. And so that bill, it's probably even more dangerous than it was before. And so that's a really dangerous one. And I'd like to get just one thing, just for the folks who are listening to this. We're always hearing that a particular Supreme Court justice, especially in campaigns, they did that. But Supreme Court justices individually don't make decisions. The decisions by the Supreme Court are collective decisions, and it's got to be by a majority of the justices on the court. And so, in most cases, it's usually a unanimous decision. So it's collectively the decision is made. It's not an individual bringing their biases, prejudices in there, because that gets weeded out. Decisions collectively, and I think that's important for folks to remember when politicians are calling it a liberal court and they're out of touch and they're legislating from the bench. there's a lot of checks and balances within right there with among all the Supreme Court.
That's a really good reminder.
Yeah, it is. One other bill that wanted to bring to the folks' attention, it's Senate Bill 395. And what's about that bill? And we get a little bit into the weeds, legal mumbo jumbo here. But what's important about this bill, and not actually made a copy of it, it's an out and out attack on the health. The health decision, one where all the younger people, high school students, they brought the lawsuit against the state because the state was not abiding by its responsibility to maintain a healthful and clean environment. And there was a big, long, drawn-out trial, and they won. And then the case was appealed to the Montana Supreme Court, and it was held there. So the 705 is designed to, it gets at what we call in the legal world standing. But that, if you want to bring a lawsuit against the state, for example, like these kids did, you have to be able to state your claim and show that you have the ability to bring this claim. That's standing, and that there's some injury that you're trying to adjudicate. Well, this Senate Bill 395 explicitly tightens the ability of people to stand. And so that's critically important because just like the plaintiff Simpel case had the right to bring that claim to enforce the constitutional right that we all have, what Senate Bill 395 is trying to do is to try and to squeeze that down to where you almost have no ability to satisfy the standing requirement. So it's a really important bill. And anybody out there ought to get on legislators and say, vote this down.
This bill seems like not only an attack on the judiciary, but on Montanans as well.
It is. It's on Montana's ability to take a case to court. And it's an attack on the judiciary by squeezing the criteria that you need to show that you have standing, but it also shrinks the ability of Montana citizens.
Well, thank you for flagging that bill. I know maybe I've heard of it, but I didn't quite understand the ramifications. So I appreciate you bringing that to everyone's attention. I actually have some questions from our listeners to share with you. They had some questions about some of the judiciary bills, and I'll start with the first one, which seems like the only way to really protect the judiciary from partisanship is to get rid of dark money. What's your suggestion for how to accomplish that?
That's a tough one because dark money is based on a United States Supreme Court decision, Citizens United. And so as long as Citizens United is established as the law, it's going to be hard to get rid of dark money. Because really, dark money is just all of these PACs. It's not really from individuals. It's PACs where they go out and get all kinds of money, all kinds of organizations, corporations included, and bundle it all together, and then go out and have it depend expenditure on some candidate's behalf. So it's going to be really hard to get rid of dark money. I think what people have to do is when they hear about dark money or there's a bill that they need to look at, where there's a campaign and they're seeing stuff, you know what it's like during campaigns. There's all kinds of fly and stuff on TV and social media. Find out where the money, who's supporting it, because they have to tell you where the money's coming from, and look into it. And I remember in my campaign for the Supreme Court, I kept getting bombarded by these flyers that would go in the mail, and finally one came that attack my integrity, accuse me of releasing a child molester from prison. Like I said earlier, I was one person that signed on to this particular case, and it was a unanimous decision of the Supreme Court. But I had finally had enough, and I did an ad. I called it the mailbox ad, where I went to a mailbox, pulled out all this stuff, and I just said, "This is garbage. It's trash. It's coming from people from out of state trying to buy your vote, and don't believe it, and then throw it in the garbage can." And so people have to be a little more vigilant when stuff like that comes. I mean, the first reaction for everybody is just throw it in the garbage, but look at it, see where it's coming from. I mean, one good example is Americans for Prosperity. It sounds great. We all want prosperity, but that's a act that's funded by the Koch brothers. And there are others just like that that dump tons of money into these various races. And so the voter just has to take a look at those things and don't believe anything that those out-of-state PACs are trying to.
Right. Oh, we had another question about how would partisan judges affect the future of choice and reproductive freedom and access to abortion in Montana? Why are there some folks out there that are deeply concerned about what happens to the courts? Like, how could that possibly affect reproductive freedom in Montana, especially since we just passed CI 128?
Well, if a person is elected to the bench and they're highly partisan and they have very strict conservative views about abortion, for example, and they're just completely opposed to it, if they don't recuse themselves from deciding a case like that, then they're going to bring, they're going to bring their personal views to that decision-making process. And so, and that's what sets Montana apart from like the U.S. court where, Roe versus Wade was overturned. Montana, the right to abortion is based upon the Montana constitutional right to privacy. So a woman and her doctor have a privacy right, make those kind of medical decisions without the state being able to come into the doctor office with them and make decisions on the woman's behalf. And so, I don't want to say every judge might be elected who is, whether they're partisan or nonpartisan, whether they're Democrat or Republican, would vote against the right to an abortion in Montana, but it's going to be a lot more probable that somebody that is highly religious, has views that abortion is not right, and that the right to regulate it is going to make that decision in the court system.
Okay. The last question I have from you, we had several people ask a form of this question, and that is just taking a look at the political landscape of the legislature, where Republicans have the majority in the House, as well as the Senate. Folks are wondering, is this just mean these bills will pass, that we're doomed, that the judiciary is under attack by these Republicans, and there's nothing Democrats or people candidly who just are opposed to partisan judges? I guess the question is, are we hopeless here?
I would say no, we're not hopeless. In fact, my wife and I went to a legislative town hall meeting. It was during the break for the legislature, and there were 10 legislators there, and they all seemed very enthusiastic about what they were able to get done in Helena, and that they were sticking together as a group. that they weren't footering off, that it's the Republicans that are having internal fights. And in fact, they were saying that, and I've heard this from others, that there's a group of 9 Republicans who have been joining with the Democrats to kill things. And I'm assuming that Bill 42, that they get a law, they communicate that they're not on the same page on every bill, but at least on these judiciary bills, they seem to be on the same page. So there's reason for optimism. And look at this last election. The Democrats had 12 new legislators, which stripped away the Republican supermajority. And there's, like here in Gallatin County, there's a couple more lawyers who were elected to the legislature. Helps. So I think there's a lot of room for optimism going forward, because we can replicate what happened in Gallatin. Gallatin County's it's getting a lot more Democratic. He elected some new legislators from Gallatin County, and that can happen statewide. So they're getting the job done. Like I said, we're very enthusiastic about what they were doing and how they were done over there. And I think when we'll see how the dust settles end of the session, that they were very optimistic themselves.
I think our listeners will be very encouraged to hear your optimism. And I know it is important. We can't celebrate yet. Obviously, there's still a month left in the session, and that means folks need to continue to engage with their lawmakers. They need to continue to provide testimony on all these terrible bills and make sure their voices are heard, because it's not over.
Right.
All Justice Week, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us.
There's probably more we could talk about, but if you invite me back, we'll talk about it.
We'll definitely need to check in again before the session ends, so thank you again.